Roll call.
Okay, you want a roll call?
Yes.
Okay. Director Bragman,
Here.
Director Gibson,
Here.
and Chair Russell.
Here. Okay. I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So move.
Second.
Second.
Yep.
Roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schmidt,
Present.
and Chair Russell.
Aye. Okay. Any public comment?
Not on the agenda.
Yeah.
Are you asking for public comment like for, okay. No,
Yes,
there are
I'm
none.
asking
Yeah,
where
there
it
are
is
none.
on the, yes.
There
Okay,
are none.
good. I need a motion to approve the minutes.
So
Move
moved.
approval.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schmidt,
Aye.
and Chair Russell.
Aye. Okay, item 2, Fire Flow Improvement Program.
Hey, good morning. Crystal Yesman, Director of Engineering. We have today Kristen Arnold, who's going to give you a short presentation. This is on the Fire Flow program. This is our annual report on our accomplishments for the last year. Go ahead, Kristen.
Hi, good morning. I've got a quick presentation for you today. So this is for the Fire Flow Improvement Program. This program started in 1998 with the Fire Flow Master Plan. And the Fire Flow Master Plan ended in 2012, and that's when the Fire Flow Improvement Program was created to complete the projects that weren't finished in the master plan, and then also included projects that fire chiefs identified as still needing to be completed. So this is the annual report for fiscal year 2021. This is the 9th year of the 19-year program. And we completed projects in San Rafael and the Watershed. So in San Rafael, the district replaced just over 3,000 feet of 93-year-old pipe on 5th Avenue. The total pipeline length for this project is just under 3,600 feet. So the remaining few hundred feet were installed at the very beginning of fiscal year 2022 and will be included in next year's report. The second project was the Porteous tunnel repair on the Watershed. Porteous tunnel is located right at 5 Corners. In this project, slipped lined 611 feet of 94-year-old pipe, and it went through the tunnel.
You remember when that was put in, Jack?
I could guess, but no, not specific.
No, I was joking.
Yeah. I could come close.
Excuse me, Kristen.
No problem. Overall, in fiscal year 2021, the district invested about $3.4 million in fire flow funds in support of the replacement of about 3,780 feet of fire flow deficient pipe. Since 1998, the district has invested almost $117 million in support of the Fire Flow Master Plan and the Fire Flow Improvement Program. The work completed included replacement of over 93.5 miles of pipe, as well as various seismic improvements at treatment plants, transmission tanks, and pump stations. Looking ahead to the next 10 years of the Fire Flow Improvement Program, there's about $48 million remaining to replace about 30.8 miles of fire flow deficient pipe.
Will that be enough?
That's a good
From-
question.
From what I've looked at over the last couple years, it's likely not going to be enough to replace the 30.8 million, or sorry, the 30.8 miles of pipeline.
Maybe, Ben, we should identify that. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to the fire flow revenue in the long run if we go again or we stop. If we're not going to go again, then we should probably think about bolstering that account to finish this 30.8 miles out of the regular CIP.
Yeah, it's a good point. We do have our annual meeting with the fire chiefs coming up. And we'll talk about that because the other question is, often they'd be able to identify additional pipe as well and maybe really justify a continuation of the fee. So yeah, we'll bring that up with them and gain a better understanding.
I mean, I would assume there's more pipe becomes deficient over time. So it's sort of a continuous process,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
maybe we
but
should-
is that really fire flow or is that maintenance? You know,
Right. That's a good point. I mean, this program's really designed not for the cyclical maintenance and replacement, but specifically for undersized pipes that we wouldn't necessarily prioritize from an infrastructure standpoint, but the fire folks prioritize from a firefighting standpoint. So that's really how this came about, to prioritize these projects ahead of others, this other funding stream. So it really is looking at deficient size pipes and understanding, but codes change and understandings change. So it's still possible that they do identify additional pipe in this. So we'll have that discussion and bring it back to the board at the right time.
I'm surprised we only, you said annual meetings. I'm surprised we only meet with them once a year.
Well, formally, we do have plenty of engagement
Okay,
throughout the year.
yeah, good, yeah. Yeah,
so I have go ahead,
this all
sorry.
started with the original fire flow plan. When previously the district took the position, it's not our responsibility to provide water for fighting fires, only for
Well,
domestic use, which is
Which
somewhat insane, but that was the official position.
I would say, Director Gibson, that's not an uncommon position from water districts. You do see it different in cities where you have a city manager kind of just saying, just do it. But there's a lot of issues assuming a water district full responsibility for firefighting capabilities. And it is a kind of discussion that goes on at most water districts that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, well, obviously, close coordination with the firefighters is critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is really
Of
a great update. It would be something that would be helpful. Again, I just feel that a lot of our customers do not understand that we're more than just delivering water to their taps and toilets, but this is that we also address fire protection, urban fire protection, as well as our open space lands. It would be interesting, I think, if we could not only talk about miles of pipe, but also I don't know if it would be quantified as areas of our neighborhoods or numbers of homes that now have modern standard fire flow protection. I think these are, putting it in terms of actually like what it means to people or to neighborhoods or so forth. I think that would be really valuable. That's really what this is about, not just miles of pipe.
That's good.
keep in mind, Monty, that we have a big brother here, which is the ISO, the insurance folks.
Yeah, that's right.
I haven't heard any rumbles about Marin having any difficulties getting fire insurance. And the ISO is looking behind all the time. You see your renewal of your fire insurance on your home as a routine thing. It's not. There's been an assessment by ISO in the background evaluating exactly the things you're talking about. So we have some help there, but it's important to explain that to folks that, what we're really doing here is saving the money on their home insurance, their home fire insurance.
Yeah, another really good point. I just think
Well-
that would be really, if that's not too much trouble for us to figure out a way to incorporate that into our presentations, that would be, I think it would be helpful for our customers.
Well, again, a very primary motive of the original fire flow program was pointed at the fact that several areas of the county could not get fire insurance, particularly the higher elevations. Mill Valley was very problematic for fire insurance, prior to the fire flow.
And presumably that's not true anymore.
It's greatly diminished. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard
Yeah.
rumblings of
Yeah. It's
non-renewals.
not gone, but it's,
So another thing we might want to consider is coordinating with the wildfire agency. Bringing them in on this annual discussion to see, if they have some pinch points that may need to be addressed in their, strategic plan. So that might be worth coordinating with them. The other thing I wanted to ask staff about is when I looked at Porteous, on the one side of Porteous, the side towards Bolinas Road, it's sort of open. And I'm just wondering whether we should put some kind of security screen on that opening on the tunnel.
Take a look at that.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
would definitely take a look at that.
The other thing to keep in mind here is that, and there's been a lot of smoke about this in the last 10 years, that the fire option requires the water district to unnecessarily increase the size of its mains, which is not a bad thing, except for one thing, which is it increases the detention time of water stored within the system, which tends to degrade the water quality. So there's kind of a trade-off here. While you attain better fire flows, you slow down the water under normal usage and it stays in the system longer. It's led to things like nitrification of chloramination, for instance. Chloramines get nitrified. East Bay Mud, we did a project for them about 6 years ago on a piece of pipe, a neighborhood that was having real problems with nitrification because the water flows were just too low in that area. So there's a trade-off there that we need to keep in the back of our minds. It's nothing we can really do about, but it affects how especially dead ends are handled in terms of water quality.
The unintended consequences of our good acts.
Yeah, there's a professor at North Carolina who actually was promoting to say we should separate the systems, have a fire system and a water system, because most of the water uses you could probably get by with 2 or 3 inch pipe, but the fire is pretty much 6 inch minimum. So a 6 inch to a 3 inch is 4 times the size, or 1/4 of the velocity, or 4 times the detention. So it makes a big difference going from 6 to 3. And he was promoting that pretty heavily at one point, a well-respected professor. But it didn't really gain traction because of the kind of, we're basically hooked at the hip to the fire department.
Yeah, I would point out, we take tens of thousands of water quality samples a year throughout our distribution system and identify areas that need to be flushed in order to, clean up the water quality. And we have an annual flushing program, and it's notified to the customers. They'll see us opening a hydrant and flushing a certain neighborhood. So we certainly keep an eye on it. And it's a good question. How much is the upsizing impacting these areas in terms of water quality?
Exactly, Crystal. That's the reason I brought it up. That's the point to take away from it. And then again, are we going to continue to flush in the drought?
We did postpone our flushing last year because of the drought.
So you know what I'm saying? It gets again, it's all hooked together, and as long as it's looked at as a system, it's fine. That you recognize, okay, we're not doing this, but that's going to potentially impact that. Not that you may be able to do anything about it. It's just part of life. Have you seen these? And this may not be applicable for the flushing goal at MMWD, but these devices that recirculate the water, they filtered it out and put it back into the main?
Yeah, we used it up in Portland, Oregon, when I was managing operations up there. We pretty much piloted the process, and it's now being utilized in different water districts across the country. It's an investment though in a filtration system in order to put it back in.
Absolutely, and it may not gain anything in water quality, because if we don't having turbidity problems, which I don't think we are, but I know LA Water and Power is where I've worked with them on that, and there they have a lot of cast iron and blood red water coming out of the mains, and they've used this device and saved millions of gallons of water. Okay, any public comment?
Yes, Roger Roberts.
Good morning, Roger.
Good morning. Question, how often, I know you test the water at the point of clarification and processing, but how often do we test the water in the pipes on a spot basis?
I can answer that if you'd like. We have tests that are done weekly in different areas of the system, and every week we run somewhere between 40 and 60 tests on the water. Those are for total coliform, so they're looking for biological growth in the water, checking for chlorine residual as well.
So does that also address could that also address the nitrification issue that Larry Russell's are raising?
We would certainly spot it, and we, in addition to monitoring, that monitoring I was talking about occurs in the pipe networks. We also monitor our tanks, going out to a number of tanks on a weekly basis, looking at chlorine residuals in the tanks. And during those events, we would identify any water quality issues.
Thank you.
It seems to me, Roger, if I've got my numbers right, Paul, we do almost 1 million samples a year in total.
I haven't done that calculus.
I remember that being tossed out at one point in time.
It's a lot. I don't know if we get to 1 million, but it's a lot of samples. Yeah.
Let's see if we get a number out of the lab, just out of curiosity. Not today, obviously, but at some point.
Sure.
Good question, Roger.
There are no further comments.
Okay, any other board comments? Hearing none, let's go on to number 3.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take this one today. This is
Okay.
a pipeline extension agreement for the Marydale Townhomes at 350 Redwood Highway, San Rafael. And just to give you an idea of how long these agreements take, the initial application from Campus Properties was submitted to the city of San Rafael back in 2017. So 5 years ago, they started the process for 44 townhomes. Ultimately, it ended up being 45, but through 2017 up to early 2020, they went through the Planning Commission, environmental review. City of San Rafael is the lead agency, so they reviewed the initial study, mitigated negative declaration, and went through all the public hearings and commenting for the mitigated neg deck. And it was in February of 2020 that the city council approved the project and the mitigated neg deck for 45 townhomes. Now, originally we were going to have 4 pipeline extensions into the different buildings, but we lowered it down to 1. They're going to have a central pipeline in the middle. It's a 6-inch potable water main. We need additional 340 feet of main to feed the townhomes. We're also requiring them to install dual plumbing to the condos, so their toilets will be flushed with recycled water. And that will entail installing a 360-foot, 4-inch recycled water main. And off of that, we've got 2 6-inch hydrants, 1 recycled water hydrant, a number of actual metered connections that go to each of the buildings, both potable and non-potable recycled. It's I think it's 10 and 10. So now the property itself already had a water entitlement of 2.25 acre feet per year, but with the additional homes, it would increase to a total of 6.69. So we're requiring them to pay a connection fee to pay for that additional entitlement of 4.17 acre feet of water per year. In the packet today are details, maps of where it's located right along Highway 101 corridor right there, as well as copies of the initial study mitigating neck deck and the City of San Rafael's certification of that environmental document. We've hired ESA to take a look at the monitoring, the project, let's see, a mitigation monitoring program plan, and because we are required to ensure that the pipeline extension, that we looked at it and made sure that there wasn't any impacts, environmental impacts from the pipeline extension. And our consultant determined that if they follow their mitigation monitoring plan, that there would be no additional impact to the environment from the construction of the pipeline, since they're tearing up the lot anyway. But that being said, we have a draft pipeline extension agreement in the packet for the installation of the reimbursement to the district of the installation of the pipeline and the appurtenances, and as well as the connection fee. And so we're asking today for the board to refer and recommend approval of the pipeline extension agreement and certifying the review of the environmental documentation to the full board for approval. With that, any questions?
Yeah, I have actually. You mentioned the recycle water hookup that we'll get. I presume there's probably very little, if any, landscaping around that project. Am I right about that?
Yeah, there is minimal landscaping, but it will be irrigated with recycled water as well.
Okay, good, good.
And Crystal, do we know the percentage of the annual acre feet of recycled versus potable?
Yeah, I don't have that for today's meeting. I could, we're gonna have to figure out toilet flushing. We're requiring, a certain volume toilet, 1.28 gallons per flush or less. And I would have to calculate the percentages. For the Talus, we had assumed a 60-40 split, 40% recycle, but they're single family homes with landscaping. So in this case, it's the recycled water use will probably be a bit smaller of a percentage. So we could get back to you with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just had a question. There already there's a new project that was built right along 101.
Mm-hmm.
And is there an existing structure where Marydale is going in? Because I really don't understand where this thing is located. I mean, I saw the map, but.
Right, yeah, it's a little bit more north than that one that's just completed construction.
Okay.
Yeah. The lot has been already graded, I believe, but there was a building there that they tore down. Yeah.
So it's like at the end of the strip mall?
No,
It's closer to the storage units. They have self-storage unit near the cemetery. So just past that, past the railroad tracks. So it's right past the railroad tracks, just south of the railroad tracks.
Okay.
Between the frontage road and Marydale.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And just for the record, I mean, this to satisfy the many people who write emails on such things, this has all received approvals from the City of San Rafael. It's not within, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Molly, but it's not within our jurisdiction, our legal authority to simply deny this project. It's our obligation simply to provide the water.
The project, you're correct, Director Gibson, the project itself has been approved. So the question in front of the committee today is to refer a pipeline extension agreement to provide the water. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And why did they already have, that's a pretty significant allocation of water. Why did they already have that? Was there somebody there that was using water?
Yeah, there must have been. It's 2.3 acres, so it's a rather large lot already. I'd have to look into what was there prior to their acquisition.
Yeah, at your convenience. It's not that important. I'm just curious. Any other questions? Public comment?
There are none.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. And thank you very much, Crystal.
Okay, great, thank you.
So do we need to do anything, or it's just information? Refer
This
to
is
the
a
board or anything?
referral, but we can take a non-objection as a referral
Okay,
to the full board. Thank you.
that's cool. Thank you. Okay, item 4.
I have this item. Good morning, board. Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. Let me pull up my presentation here. All right. So this is a discussion on the drought restrictions and looking at what the details of each of the drought restrictions that are currently in place, and discussion on rolling them back potentially. So overview, we will look at the conservation measures that were put in place as part of our drought response for a mandatory water reduction program. We'll look at lessons learned and then move on to next steps. I did want to start with a projected reservoir storage, recognizing, with all the recent rain we've gotten and that how healthy our current water supply is. And I understand that the board saw this at the last board meeting. So you should be familiar with this slide. But this kind of helps set the stage for the discussion on the mandatory water use reduction program and the details of what we rolled out and when we rolled them out, and potentially how we could roll them back. So starting with our emergency drought actions, before we go into kind of each of the steps that were taken over the last year, I do want to acknowledge that we do have a normal year conservation program within our code. And that normal year conservation program entails not only the water waste prohibitions, which we're really going to be diving in today, and the water use restrictions, if you would, but it also includes our landscape plan review, our programmatic items, our incentive programs, et cetera, fixture standards, all sorts of kind of our base year, things we would always do regardless of current or water supply conditions. But today's discussion is really going to focus in on the waterways prohibitions and the restrictions that were enacted. And we'll have a separate discussion about incentives and other programs that were rolled out as part of drought response at a later date. Oh, if I could hit the button going in the right direction. So our first step was when we declared a water shortage emergency, right? Back in April, we recognized that we projected that there would be less than 30,000 acre feet of water available on December 1st. And that action was then to declare a water shortage emergency. On the same day was the first ordinance that was put in place, which was a comprehensive mandatory conservation measures ordinance. And this really took our normal year prohibitions and then duplicated them and kind of layered them on some additional drought response. And we'll look at what those normal year measures are, and then also what new additional restrictions were put in place as part of our drought response. The following action and the next action was limiting irrigation to 2 days a week. A few months later, we did away with 2 days a week and moved to a 1 day assigned overhead irrigation. And when we moved to that 1 day a week, it repealed the prior ordinance of 2 days. The next action was to limit landscape irrigation, limit installation of landscaping for new connections. Following that was establishing our water use limits and the associated penalties. And then the most recent action was a prohibition on winter irrigation and pool filling. And again, when that winter irrigation prohibition went into effect, it repealed the prior ordinance of 1 day a week. So now we're going to look at these in a bit more detail, kind of going backwards, starting at the top, our most recent action, and then kind of unwinding each of those actions that the board has taken. So the prohibition on winter irrigation and pool filling prevents any irrigation within the service area from December through May. The pool filling item restricts use of district water for filling swimming pools that were completely drained or new swimming pools that were built within the service area and applied for a permit after December 1st. Prior to that, we enacted the water use limits and penalties, which established water use limits for both our single family customers and our irrigation customers. So single family customers, during the winter, they wouldn't be allowed to use water beyond tier 1 without penalty. And for irrigation customers, any water use that occurred during the winter months, December through May, would incur a penalty. These penalty charges, the first bi-monthly bills they would be issued on February 1st, right? So it says here, you know, this was approved September 21st, but because of our 60-day billing period, it won't actually hit bills until February 1st. This item is going to be before the board on Tuesday for consideration of repeal, for repealing this item. And if that is approved, no customers will receive bills that have those penalty charges included on them. Right? So it's an important note to make that the decision on Tuesday will affect whether or not any customer has a bill that includes a penalty charge. Prior to the penalties, the water use limits, we had a item of limiting landscape installation for new connections. So we recognize that new connections could still occur, but they could not install any landscaping using potable water. One of the outcomes of this discussion was focusing in and developing a net zero program, and that will continue even if this ordinance is repealed. It's something that staff will continue to work on and will be brought back to the board as that develops. In July, we moved to the 1 day a week of spray irrigation and 2 days a week of drip. Prior to that, in May, we allowed 2 days a week of spray irrigation, and we also required the use of pool covers. We do have an ordinance in the code that says new pools must be covered, but this actually expanded that to say all pools and spas needed to be covered just to minimize water loss. And then this is back on April 20th, the first ordinance that was put in place, again, really built on and expanded the normal year waterways prohibitions. And what it expanded them to include was prohibitions on washing of vehicles. We were not allowing water to be added to decorative fountains or refilling or topping off decorative fountains or pools. Decorative pools, that is. Golf course irrigation was restricted. We recognized that fire taps should only be used for fighting fires and no other use. We required that potable water not be used for dust control, compaction, street cleaning, and sewer flushing, or any other use that could be met with recycled water. And finally, there was a prohibition on power washing of buildings and homes. As we look at potentially rolling any of these restrictions back, I do want to recognize that there's a new state regulation that has been adopted, and we are anticipating it becoming effective any day now. And the new state emergency regulations will require that street cleaning and construction use recycled water. And also there'll be a prohibition on washing of buildings and homes. So those would continue over the course of the next year due to the state emergency reg, regardless of any action that we take.
Carrie, isn't there also a regulation that says they can't use potable water for median irrigation?
Yes, there is, and I will get to that in just a moment.
Oh, okay. Okay.
There's a few more. So for our normal year waterways prohibition, so these are items, right, that we carry forward as part of our drought response, but they are in place regardless of water supply conditions. And looking at the irrigation prohibitions for our normal year, we limit irrigation run times so that folks don't water during the day, right? We want to reduce evaporation. We limit irrigation of turf and ornamental landscapes to no more than 3 days a week. So you may recall our first irrigation ordinance limited it to 2. So that was a ratcheting down. And so this would roll it back to the 3 days a week limit that we've had in place for, the last 8 to 10 years or so. Public street medians cannot be irrigated with turf. Public street turf medians cannot be irrigated. No runoff or overspray is allowed. No irrigation within 48 hours of rainfall, and the use of garden hose without a shutoff nozzle is required. As just mentioned, the state emergency regulations do include these last 4 bullets as well. So while the state thinks of these as a part of their emergency drought response, we feel that these are important and have been part of our normal year waterway since the last drought. So it's great, right? It actually shows how progressive we are being for our normal year actions.
But I mean, don't we have a problem with that? Doesn't Caltrans take water for public median? Doesn't, like the city of San Rafael?
Most of those public street medians have been converted to that our turf have been converted. If they haven't, they'll be part of our non-functional turf actions. But many of the cities have been working with us. So, and this has been on the books for since the last drought. Additional normal year waterways prohibitions include no hosing down hardscapes. We require drinking water only be served upon request. Pools, for new pools, as I mentioned, need to be covered, and non-recirculating decorative fountains are not allowed. Also, leak repair, so repairing any leaks that are discovered in a timely manner is part of our code as well. As far as the state regulations, they're including a no hosing down of hard surfaces, which, you know, driveways, sidewalks, et cetera, would be included in that. So as we look at transitioning from this, you know, our drought restrictions, recognizing adequate water storage that we have due to the recent rainfall. So we transitioned back into our normal year. Staff looked at, well, which items should be carried forward, right? What makes sense for us to continue as part of our normal year that we enacted during the drought? Two items come, you know, raised to the surface. One would be not just requiring new pools be covered to reduce evaporation, but all pools and spots be covered when not in use, which would be a carry forward from our drought response. The other would be the dust control, compaction, sewer flushing, and street cleaning, right? Using recycled water for whenever possible, right? Recognizing the value of utilizing that recycled water, but also not using our potable drinking water for these functions would be the two items. I do want to note that the second item, the use of recycled water, we would need to reach out to, you know, our sister sanitation agencies and maybe some contractors to confirm, you know, that this makes sense as part of a normal year and what those impacts might be. But I think it kind of does help carry the message forward of the importance of, you know, using potable water as appropriate. Additionally, as I mentioned, the state regulations actually will require construction. So construction site preparation and street sweeping use recycled water. So it might be a good opportunity over the next year for us to kind of test out how this goes as far as implementation of the state regulations before we maybe add it to our normal year program. Another item worth noting is our variance process, right? So during the variance process, during the drought, the variance process was widely utilized, specifically around, you know, say, for example, working with our sister sanitation agencies around sewer flushing. And that variance process wasn't new to the drought. It's been in the code forever. That will always be an opportunity. So if this does move forward, we can utilize that variance process. We continue to utilize that variance process as needed for those circumstances that when recycled water may not be appropriate to use.
To that end, Carrie, why are we closing the reclaimed water station? It's closed now, right? The one where people can go pick up water?
Yeah, I'm going to defer that one, send that one to Paul, maybe. He would probably know more of the details on it than I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
President Russell, it's closed obviously during the wet weather. We are reaching out to the county we haven't removed it. It's still in place. And we're reaching out to the county to understand if they're okay with us keeping it in place, given that the forecast models are showing dry rest of January. And we would be looking at maybe reopening that as long as the county are okay with it, which I think they will be.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's essential that the thing stays open. Is there a cost of having it open?
Nope. I mean, staffing wise.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
But it's just staffing.
Yeah, I mean, if I could, Paul, this was never envisioned, although we can think about it if the board would like us to be integrated into our normal routine operations. That would have a cost we haven't really taken a hard look at. Most of these facilities are that operate continuously are at wastewater facilities. So they already have staff that's there, and you drive in and they have a station, and it works different than what we were able to do in getting this facility constructed. We did talk to some sanitation agencies, but this was really what we could do in the most expeditious fashion. So we did it. So we would need to, I think Director Russell about this becoming a permanent. I do appreciate kind of we're just getting out of the drought and there's all this attention. I'm not suggesting in any way that for the time being, we shouldn't think about maybe weekend operation or something like that that gives folks the opportunity to continue to use it for some period of time.
There are some side effects to the operation we had and making it available to people. First of all, people who don't now have recycled water are the obvious users. And it's an educational process. If we keep it in place, there will be more and more people that use it. It will build a support for our expanding our recycled program in general, and serve as a real educational function that has some side benefits as well as saving water.
I agree. I think at some point down the road, we would bring back to the board an alternative to keep it and what the cost would be and the impact on the budget. I don't think it would be staggering. And I do agree with you, Director Gibson. What these agencies that have kept these facilities and built on them and market them have seen is you're connecting people to recycled water in a way you can't otherwise do and gaining comfort. And it's part of a long-term strategy, right? As we think about potentially long-term indirect or direct potable reuse and the like, familiarity and working with recycled water is really a key part of that movement. So I absolutely agree with you. We should think about that.
Yeah, and also, I mean, these contractors who are being, and the street sweeper guys, they got to get the water from somewhere. So it seems to me that we should probably be talking to CSMA or somebody about a central facility, and why not just incorporate the residential pickup at the same facility? I would think. I mean,
Yeah, we do have truck fill station already set up at CMSA, and we're currently updating jointly with CMSA both our study on DPR as well as setting up a residential pickup station at the CMSA location.
great, because I think Ben is exactly right. It's a philosophical thing, and you need to get people conditioned to using it and making it available all the time, or then, because once they go off, it's going to be hard to get them back. Whereas we just keep them on, and I think we should be looking at opening it as soon as possible, as I say, as much as a philosophical thing as a practical utility for this dry period that looks like it's coming.
Yeah, I would agree with this, and in part too, because people, I think, have, and we want people to who have large landscapes, who have installed their own large, water storage. They need to be able to fill it with recycled water. We want to encourage. We want people to know that that's an investment that they can make, and that there will continue to be the ability to fill, water storage with recycled water to meet their, larger than average probably landscape water use needs.
Right, I have just a couple more slides and we get through these, and it's good discussion.
Carrie, before you move on, I noticed that it said the water needs to be disinfected under the state emergency regs. Is that an extra step as far as treating the water that's coming from our sanitation districts?
No.
That's okay.
No, yeah, even secondary water is considered disinfected. Tertiary has a slightly different criteria, but disinfected, they can, it's fairly widely available.
Okay. And the other thing I was just going to say, at some point we might want to consider delivery, which they did up in Healdsburg. I know it's a much smaller district, but as far as really encouraging and sort of normalizing the use of recycled water, it's pretty tough for most customers to haul a tank up to a fill station and haul it back and put it into use. So, I know there's some expense related to that additional expense, but it's just something I think we should at least consider and analyze.
I think that's a great suggestion, Larry. And Ben, especially in light of the fact that we're not making rocket progress in expanding our distribution system for the reclaimed water. So, you know, that's a way of solving the system. In other words, if we can't get it to you mechanically, we'll get it to you in a different way. And maybe we would even have an electric vehicle to do that or something like that.
Let's
Yeah,
also see if that's a service though that you know that the private market can provide, because you know we could of course do that, but if there are haulers out there, or if there's a business for haulers to do, you know, to be developed for people to do this, I don't know if that's something we have to take on just to make it happen more.
No, but you know, and Monty, I think that's kind of a good suggestion. So I mean, and I think that should be incorporated into any analysis, whether we should delegate the operation to a contractor, you know, because that could expand the market and create some, you know, opportunities out there in the private market. So, you know.
Monty,
Okay.
are you thinking about paying the water district, paying for that, or the people paying for it?
I don't think that, I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding the suggestion, is that the cost of moving that water to people is something that the people who have that need would be paying for on some scale.
I don't think it'll happen then, because you're talking in the like $1 a gallon to drive it.
Yeah, and that's what staff will do. We'll take this discussion and come back to the board. It really, whether we do it and the costs aren't apparent, or a private hauler does it and does charge the actual cost, it's not it's significant, particularly were this program to expand. But it's an interesting idea, and we will plan to bring something back at a future committee meeting.
Yeah, Marin Sanitary might be interested, MSS.
Oh, they would be interested. Oh yeah. I mean, they do all the street sweeping now under contract with the cities. So when you hear that street sweeper go by, it's them.
Yeah,
so
I could see us subsidizing it, but I don't see us. I think for the district to pay for all that hauling cost is it's sending the wrong signal, financial signal, to people who have, you know, very water intensive landscapes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's all.
I'm not so sure about that.
It's all going to need to be put into the hopper and calculated. It's just, you know, it's very difficult for private parties to be hauling a tank up to get filled and then bringing it back, getting it off a truck, putting it into use.
And to me, it's the same argument about buses. You know, if you want buses to work, you make them free. And if you want to try to make money off of rapid transit or off of buses, it's possible, but it's difficult. You're kind of missing the message. The message is to get the reclaimed water use expanded. That's the key to the thing.
Yeah.
And you know, go ahead, Jack.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, if we would just get on expanding our system, we're ready to go with water out to Peacock Gap. I mean, there's a number of areas we could do it. We don't have to worry about hauling it if we expand our system.
So that design is moving forward, that specific project.
That's good.
It's great to get an update about that at some point. If
We will.
Thanks.
Okay, so building up the drought response, as we repeal the drought restrictions that were put in place, we would then revert back to the normal year waterways prohibitions. And as noted, they are fairly comprehensive. The state emergency regulations will apply to our service area. And if we recall from the last drought, when the state took similar actions around emergency drought regulations, it also went hand in hand with an extensive communications plan. And there were, driving down the highway, the construction signs everywhere. Like there was just this higher level of statewide outreach. And I think that we'll continue to see that roll out, which will continue again within our service area to continue to curb demands, I think. And then also looking at incorporating reasonable drought restrictions into our normal year as noted in the prior slide. And then finally, next steps. So on Tuesday, as noted, the board will consider an ordinance to repeal the water use limits and penalties. If approved, our customers will not be impacted by any penalties due to the first bills rolling out on February 1st is when the first bills rolling out on February 1st would include penalty charges. So repealing it Tuesday would prevent that. There'll also be a discussion on non-functional turf. I'm looking forward to additional board meetings. We recommend repealing associated mandatory conservation measures and the emergency drought declaration based on board feedback from today. There'll be an extensive discussion on conservation incentives that were implemented during the drought and looking forward for long-term programs as well. And that will happen at our Water Efficiency and Communications Committee meeting. And then finally, staff is developing the water supply resiliency policy, which will also be brought back to the board. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
So Carrie,
go ahead.
I know that I think it was at a meeting I may have missed that the board instituted a citizens advisory committee on irrigation and landscape. So the one limitation that we put in place earlier on 2-day-a-week irrigation of turf, I'm just wondering if that wouldn't be something worth considering continuing. I don't really have familiarity with, the practice of turf irrigation, but it seems like that might be worth considering and might save quite a bit of water. The other thing is on the fire line restriction. Wouldn't that be something that we should consider continuing? I mean, it doesn't seem like people should be tapping into fire lines.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we'll start with the fire line question first. So we found other areas of the code that actually cover that. So it's not going away. It's just not going to be called. It was included in our drought response so that we could call it out specifically to make sure that folks were aware of it. But there are other sections of our code where that's already captured. So that's already in place and will remain.
That's prohibited under our code already.
Correct.
So then the other thing is the 2-day-a-week.
Yeah, the 2-day-a-week irrigation. I think that I would like to have staff look at that and do some analysis on whether or not that would make sense as far as our normal year program, right? 3 days a week is already fairly restrictive. 2 days a week is going to result in significant stress to turf grass. And, there are situations, playing fields and other areas where it really is appropriate that it be maintained at a level where it's actually useful, right? We don't want it to be so dry that it's causing injuries and such. And so figuring out what that balance might be. And so I think that staff could do an evaluation on that and see if that would make sense to continue.
Yeah, I would defer to your analysis. So thanks for taking it up.
I think in those kinds of areas, we should depend on education as opposed to restrictions. In other words, that should be part of our program. Get the word out there, make it known to people, educate them, but not be restrictive.
Always, but one way to educate them is to regulate. I agree with you. I agree.
That's a police style.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Carrie, how are we dealing with the $500 a day penalties from the state?
Yeah, so the state recognized that in their emergency regulations that the penalties were included to give a tool, to make it a tool for water utilities to utilize if needed. We have penalty code language within our current code, which gives us the authority to invoke penalties if we deemed it was necessary. And not all water utilities have that tool available to them. And that was what the state acknowledges why they included it.
We don't need to change the amount because I don't remember any $500 penalties unless it's the third or fourth time.
No, we don't need to make any changes to our code based on the state's emergency regulations.
Okay. Any other questions from the board?
I think this is, you've put together a really thoughtful approach to this, Carrie, and I really appreciate it. I think that this all makes sense to me, including, taking things that we've taken on as emergency drought measures and making them permanent, because they're just smart and they're just the way we ought to go. And it's a nice way of I think not a nice way. It's an important way of saying that we're not just going back to a normal, and I would almost not use the term normal year, because there is never no such thing anymore. You know, average might be, you know, a better description, but even that's got its own problems. But so I just think these things make a lot of sense, and how you know, we talk about these changes, I think is really, really important, that we're sending the right message about understanding how things have changed given our current water situation, and at the same time, some of these measures that we took on continue to make sense going forward.
So I wanted to just make sure staff understands the board's direction. I believe what I'm hearing is to proceed in accordance with the recommendation, which is at an upcoming board meeting, and you know, probably February, the first meeting in February, we would bring back to the board, pulling back the drought emergency and the associated restrictions, while we also bring into our normal year a couple of the ones that Carrie identified, and talk about additional ones we're going to be looking into for the future, something like that, to make it very clear this is not a pullback, this is a continuation, but we just don't want to keep the restrictions that were imposed because of the drought if we're out of it. So is that generally what we're hearing?
Yeah, that's what you're hearing from me. And then we would abolish the penalties at our next meeting, it seems.
Yeah.
To do that.
Right,
Okay,
on Tuesday night.
we can do that on next Tuesday.
Right.
So yes,
Yes,
will
yes.
be a public hearing that's already noticed, and we'll be doing that on Tuesday.
Okay.
Okay, any public comment?
Yes, Roger Roberts, and then Laura Levitt. Mr. Roberts? Mr. Roberts?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure I understand why we should take these measures now. Given the fact that we aren't finished with the so-called rainy season, and it may turn out that they're not going to get another drop of rain between now and May. So I wouldn't consider it a wise measure to reduce these restrictions until after the end of the rainy season, when we really know whether or not we're going to have a continued drought and there's going to be no more rain. So I wouldn't make this step take action or effective until May, after the end of the rainy season. I think it's premature. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Levitt?
Hi, this is Laura Lovett. We're in Chapter California Native Plant Society. I'd like to rebut the speaker that just said something. The new regulations you've put in place for no irrigation through May are giving us a tremendous headache. The issue is you guys talk a lot about what is feasible mechanically and what humans want, and you didn't consider what plants need. The truth about plants is that native plants take a quarter of the water of things like roses and hydrangeas and jasmine and crepe myrtle, all the things that are in everybody's garden. So if you put in some kind of an incentive to get people to put in native landscapes, you would drop your outside water bill by 75%. But you never talk about the content of what they're growing. Agriculture obviously takes even more water than that. Plants that are imported from other Mediterranean climates take 50% more water than California natives. So you guys need to be doing everything. You could be our best ally in getting native plants planted, which is what we're trying to do for the benefit of the planet and all the other creatures. The way that native plants get through the summer with no water is they have to have water in the winter, and then no irrigation until May 31st is great if we have a wet winter. It will kill the plants if we don't, because they will not make it through the summer. And then to start pouring water on June 1st is exactly the wrong thing to do for native plants. So this restriction, which works with your building cycle, does not work for the plants at all. It does not keep the plants alive. It does not support the plants that are going to be the lowest water and the least maintenance and the most effective to have in your landscape. So there needs to be, I mean, we're happy to come talk to you about this. It's an ongoing issue for us. And I think there needs to be a really major education campaign from the water district to get people to move to the plants that are going to work better in the long term. That's what we needed to be doing 20 and 30 years ago. You know, lawn is by far the most water thirsty thing. It has a 4-inch root system. It's why it can't survive without water every 2 days. Whereas a native plant can put a root down that's 5 to 20 feet down. And that's how it gets through the dry summer. But it has to have water to get established to put that root system down, and then it will survive without it. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to talk further.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ms. Levitt. Are there others?
Yeah, there's Mr. John
Okay.
Lashinsky. Mr. John?
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. By the way, I totally agree with Roger. I think you should take a look at the restrictions up until May. I think that's a good idea. Point number 2 is I'd just like to ask the question about the pipeline that was supposed to go over the Richmond Bridge. And I understand now that that's been consigned to the dustbin of history. Am I incorrect in that?
Yeah.
Incorrect.
Okay, are you going to resurrect that at any point?
Yeah, this item is not on the agenda, so we can't get into it. I would
okay.
just say, I'll just say that it is not dead. The board directed staff to proceed as we're doing with a full environmental review. On February 1st, we expect to bring the contract to kick that off. So we are moving full speed, just in a different way. And we do expect that project to continue and be viable and get it done. Thank you.
Okay. But corollary to that, based on my hyperventilated email that I sent you guys, are you going to establish a formal review of other options for finding new sources of water to prepare for future droughts, which are invariably are going to happen?
Yes, sir.
I think
this also is not on the agenda, so we can't talk about it, but
well,
I
it's
would
part of
say,
it.
let me just, I would encourage you, if you're able to, attend the next Tuesday board meeting where we're specifically going to be laying out the plan and strategy that includes the answer to your question, which is yes.
I would like to go back to, if there's no other comments, I'd like to speak to Roger Roberts' comment, which is, I think that we recognize that we are not out of the woods. We are, we have, I would argue, a climate-driven water shortage issue that is not going away until we take a number of additional steps and including, I think, identifying new water supplies, drought resilient ones. But at the same time, we have to reflect that we do have nearly full reservoirs, and given where we are at right now, having emergency restrictions, especially financial penalties, is inconsistent with what people see outside. And I think we need to have we have to be measured in if we put in place restrictions, emergency restrictions, we have to be also responsive to the fact when we are not necessarily in emergency conditions that warrant those. And we don't know what the future will bring, but we do know that we have enough water supplies now that if we don't get another drop of water, we are not in imminent danger of running out. And so if we in the future want to have in place restrictions that do stay in place permanently, then we have to approach that, I think, in a different way than as an emergency measure. And so it's not that we shouldn't be looking at these restrictions and which ones should become permanent. We've even talked about ones that we would like to keep permanent. But I think we have to do that in a more measured process where we actually think about how to address the situation that we have. And so I think at this point, I think the balance of what we are proposing to do makes sense.
Yeah.
Well put, Monty.
Chair Russell, Mr. Leszczynski wants to speak again.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead, sir.
There we go.
Go ahead.
I understand that, Mr. Schmidt, and I appreciate that. Maybe lowering the penalties quite a bit might do, but getting back to my original concern is new sources of water. So as I understand it, on February 1st, you're going to be discussing that kind of an issue. And
Yes.
And that, okay. And I heard something at the beginning, please bear with me. You are not going to discuss agenda item number 5. Is that what's going to happen on February 1st?
No, I don't think
Well-
so. Not that I'm aware of. I haven't. I'm
number
running the
5 talks
agenda.
about-
Number 5 talks about a capital improvement program.
Improvement. Okay, improvement as opposed to new sources.
Yeah, this is money.
Is that
Number
what
5.
I understand?
Number 5 is money, not water. I mean, it's water, but it's not about sources of water.
Oh, strictly money.
Money. Yeah, the money to build the project.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
I will rejoin on February 1st. Thank you.
We look forward to your comments. I would like to suggest that we approach Ms. Levitt. I'd like to hear more about what she had to say. It was quite interesting. At the minimum, Carrie, please touch base with her. I'm sure you guys are pretty well synced already, but let's hear what she has to say. And I would invite her to come to a doc meeting or a board meeting to make a presentation, Ben. So let's get some thought on that and see how we can integrate their thinking into the long term. I think we already kind of do that. I mean, that's what the cash for turf is, or cash for grass, right? That we're encouraging people to take the grass out and put in native plants, or at least drought resistant plants. I don't know if they're native
Director
or not.
Russell, yes, actually, we go well beyond that in many ways that Carrie could get into now, or we can do it at a later date. But we are very aligned with much, if not everything, that she said, and we're working in that direction. But I think it's a good idea to engage her and link up as you're suggesting, and we'll do that.
Yeah.
I think that, I'm excited. I appreciate that, Director Russell, for pursuing that. I would agree, and I wonder to whether our long-term planning around future drought conditions, whether we could take into consideration landscapes that have been swapped, especially grass that's been swapped out for native plants, and provide that those be treated differently on future restrictions than irrigation of non-drought tolerant landscapes, such that, again, another incentive that if you put in a drought tolerant landscape, you will be less likely to experience required reductions because it is a step that has taken us in the right direction, reducing outdoor irrigation use.
Sort of like the vaccination. You get vaccinated, you get to go to these places. I like that approach. I think that makes sense.
I'll just note that Director Russell, during as part of our drought response, I mean, short of prohibition on all irrigation, but generally native plants are irrigated in drip, and we consistently allowed for additional days of irrigation with utilizing drip,
Sure.
recognizing that we're really focusing on turf grass, and that was our intent, and I think we can continue to build on that.
I agree, and thank you for a nice presentation. I enjoyed it. Okay, no more public, Terry?
There's none.
Okay, let's go on to item 5, review of capital program.
Okay, that's me again, Crystal Yasmin, Director of Engineering. I'm going to share my screen. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. Let me get the other screen. There we go. Do you see just the presentation, or the PowerPoint? Just the presentation?
Looks
Yeah,
good.
it looks good. Yep.
Okay, good. All right. So I'm gonna go through a PowerPoint where we're gonna review our current capital program and projects, priority projects that are ripe for potential bond funding. Oops. There we go. So first we'll go over historical and current capital improvement program. You've seen this slide before. This is our expenditures on our capital program over the last 10 years, averaging around 20 million a year for 221 million total. And in the last 10 years, with the 221 million that we've spent, some of the larger projects that we've accomplished are upgrading the filters at San Geronimo and Bon Tempe water treatment plants, replacing some deficient storage tanks, recoding storage tanks, replacing 68 miles of pipe, including Sir Francis Drake. We repaired the Ross Reservoir landslide and Porteous Tunnel. Those are some larger projects in the last 10 years. And just looking at the last 6 months of our capital program, from July 1st to December 31st, we've completed the projects on this list you see here in front of you. We've replaced the aerator vent lines at Kent Lake. We updated our corrosion test stations. We did spillway repairs at Nicasio, Kent, and Sulahule. There was the Southern Marin Pipeline Replacement Project, phase 1. We're currently in phase 2. And of course, the big one, Sir Francis Drake, with the repaving of Sir Francis Drake, we replaced the old sugar line that was in the road there, over 100 years old. And then the Southern Heights Boulevard Bridge Pipeline Replacement Project and the Fifth Avenue Pipeline Replacement Project is a fire flow project that's been completed this fiscal year. And then as of today, these are the projects that we have in planning, design, and construction at some point, whether in its life cycle. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the projects that you've heard about that the staff is working hard to complete. We've launched a project planning for advanced metering infrastructure with a consultant eSource, and that'll lead hopefully to a full-scale implementation, given that we can get the funding for it. Well, there's also this transmission system improvements project that we discussed last in December for looking at bottlenecks in our system in order to ensure that we can obtain our contractual allotments from Sonoma County. As you know, we do have some bottlenecks within our own system that prevent us from bringing in available water. Of course, we're moving to the environmental impact report for Richmond Intertie project. In design, we have the Pine Mountain Tunnel. The board just approved the final design contract on that. That'll replace the Pine Mountain Tunnel and actually increase fire flow, deficient fire flow storage for the Ross Valley area. The Phoenix Lake transfer pumps are in design. That's moving water from Phoenix Lake up to Bon Tempe. And we're actually having a meeting with the county soon to discuss how we could have mutual benefit in terms of flood control and water supply with that project. And we're really excited. We just heard that there could be some grant funding on that project. The Santa Margherita altitude valve project is underway. We've ordered parts. That's going to help us with the bottleneck that we know of in order to get water from Sonoma County into our system. In construction are all the projects you see there. Of course, Castagna Pump Station is a really important one for the district. And we will have a presentation on that at a future board meeting. And then also the San Geronimo generator project. And as you know, during the initiation of the PSPS, the public power shutdown of PG&E after all the horrific fires in California, we decided we needed to get a permanent generator installed at San Geronimo, and it's currently underway and in construction. That's a 3 megawatt generator system. So, we have to be flexible with our capital program. Projects come up and and projects get postponed. And this gives you an idea of projects that have been added and postponed just in fiscal year 22. For example, on pipelines, we launched into the emergency intertie project, and on treatment plants, we upsized the generator project from 2 megawatts to 3 megawatts. So that required us to be flexible and add scope and to that project. Castagna Pump Station and the Phoenix Lake Transfer Pump Stations. The Pine Mountain Tunnel is being fast-tracked. It's something that we really want to pursue for a number of reasons, because Pine Mountain Tunnel is past its useful life and poses possible water quality issues. It leaks. We need more storage in that area, so that's in design. Advanced metering infrastructure, as you know, will assist us with drought in order to monitor water use and find leaks as soon as they're happening. And then Peacock Gap Recycled Water, we actually have proposals due this month for 30% design and CEQA permitting on that project. We'll be bringing that to the board soon in a future meeting. We have a big retaining wall on Sky Oaks Road that came up, unexpected, that needs to be replaced, and as well as we added some grant funded projects when we received notification of grant awards that were not originally in the budget, and that was the local hazard mitigation plan and the Lagunitas Creek habitat projects that are in design for phase 1 and phase 2. And so in order to accomplish these projects, we have to postpone projects. So, we're postponing the number of projects that you see to the right there. We thought we were going to be moving into construction on Smith Saddle, but we're going to delay that in lieu of Pine Mountain. But we also put a halt on the water system master plan when we needed to change our focus onto the emergency intertie project, and some other projects that also got moved to future years. With that, let me go into more detail on the costs of these projects and where we stand today in terms of the finances on our capital program. Oh, well, actually, sorry. First, we'll go to schedule. So here, this is putting it into a schedule. When you look at multiple years, Pine Mountain Tunnel, we would do over the next 3 to 5 years. And then we had to actually delay, we're going to have to delay Ross Reservoir in order to get Pine Mountain Tunnel started. And those other projects that you see there, Castagna Pump Station came up, and those are the tanks projects as well. And all of the long-term schedule is something that we bring to the board periodically when we do budget approvals, and also we bring these to the board during financial planning for long-term financial planning. Okay, so here's the cost in thousands. So our typical, our approved budget for fiscal year 22 was $26 million, and the revenues from that come from our capital maintenance fee. So it's sort of pay-as-you-go cash financed. Now, we also make adjustments to that budget because we have encumbrances from prior fiscal years that we carry forward. So for example, we might award a construction project, it's still in construction, but the money was from the prior fiscal year, so we move it forward into the next fiscal year. We also make transfers between these different asset categories. If we delay, say, Green Bay tank recoating, we can then take that money and move it to another project that came up unexpectedly. And then we also have unexpended fire flow funds. So certain years, the revenue for fire flow is essentially about 4.5 million a year, but sometimes we spend more and sometimes we spend less. So it carries forward every year with that particular fund. And then we also have adjustments that are made from transfers from our rate stabilization reserves, which the board approved in terms for the Castagna, for example, and for the emergency intertie project. So as you can see today, we're actually working on about $41 million worth of projects. But of course, those the money won't be spent in 1 year. Again, things will carry forward to next fiscal year as adjustments are made. But this gives you an idea of our working capital program. And we have tons of spreadsheets and Gantt charts that we go through continuously, and we're always updating this. All right, so over the last year or two, we've had a number of long-term financial planning workshops where we brought forward to the board portfolios of projects that were unfunded that we thought were important to undertake, or perhaps an increase in the level of investment in, say, tank replacement or tank recoating would be an example. And we've had a lot of detail on these portfolios, and we discussed with the board, what projects we felt needed to move forward. although, our baseline funding is about $26 million a year, we felt, there was different levels of investment that should be made. And the board looked at all the different projects, and we sort of came up with a hybrid recommendation of how much we should be spending each year on capital infrastructure compared to our baseline, which amounts to about $37 million a year. And so that's an increase in our baseline investment. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on what that $37 million a year entailed in terms of that hybrid portfolio of increased investment. And I also want to point out before I move on that, we're in the final stretch of this 10-year financial planning. We'll be coming back to the board to finalize it and use it to feed into our next cost of service analysis. And that, however, we did initiate contracts with financial advisors and bond counsel when we were thinking we were going to move forward on the emergency intertype project. So we have those resources at our disposal now. And we also note that interest rates for bond financing at this time are quite low. And so we do have a number of priority projects within this 10-year, financial plan that we would like to recommend and encourage the board to consider bond financing some of these priority projects that are in this hybrid portfolio to be done in the next 3 to 5 years. And then we will, of course, relook at it. So I'm going to go into the detail of those priority projects now. So here we have some priority projects that we would recommend for bond funding. Now, as I mentioned, Pine Mountain Tunnel, we're accelerating that construction. And to do so, we're going to have to delay other projects. So to the fact that the Pine Mountain Tunnel is going to cost about $20 million, that means we're delaying about $20 million of just routine projects, pipeline replacements, tank recoatings that we're not doing. And then the list below are all the different projects that were in that hybrid portfolio of recommended increased investment. But to look specifically at the ones that we think should be funded sooner than later, I want to point them out. So potential projects for bond funding would be the Pine Mountain Tunnel project, so that, as a large investment, long-term investment, the bond funding would allow you to spread those costs over, multiple years of repayment, and then allow us to use that $20 million for projects that we've delayed, essentially. And then also the advanced metering infrastructure, we believe, is a very important project that we need to get going on and move into installation and construction. And then this transmission system improvements project, these bottlenecks that we found that are preventing us from bringing in our contractual allotments from Sonoma County. And we'll have another presentation on the transmission system improvement details of those specific projects at a later board meeting. Now, Smith Saddle, we've actually received approval from the federal government that we're approved for WIFIA funding on Smith Saddle. And to the fact that WIFIA funding has a much lower interest rate than bond funding. In fact, we're just to be conservative, we're saying 2%, but we've heard it could be as low as 1.3% on a WIFIA loan versus a bond fund, which is about 4%. So we would like to get approval at some point from the board to move forward with the WIFIA loan on Smith Saddle. And then in total, this would add $80 million to our baseline, which is, the $26 million a year that we typically spend on capital projects. All right, so moving forward to revenue bonds and what this would cost and rate impacts, I'm going to go into that in more detail now. Now, you saw this slide at the December 9th finance meeting, and where we showed you where we have had bond sales in the past. So in 2010, we had a bond sale of $32.2 million, and that was new money. And then after that, we refunded it because interest rates were low. We also refunded some older bonds from 2002 and 2004. And then coming up this year in April, we're actually going to refund the $76.5 million that was owed as of June of last year on the older bonds. We expect that to be refunded at a lower, we'll have paid some of it off. So we'll be refunding it at 67.5. But as of June of last year, we had an outstanding bond balance of about $142 million. Now, if we were to take out new bonds, what would that do to the rates and to or there's the, there's the 142.5 million. So here we go. So we're going to present to you today 4 different scenarios to leverage the benefit of having the low interest rates, and we're ready to go on a bond sale if you do choose to go forward. Scenario 1 would to take out a bond for 20 million to do Pine Mountain Tunnel. And the annual debt service on that would be $1.2 million a year. And the first payment wouldn't be due into 2023. It would impact the rates to our customers by a mere 1.1%. And our debt service coverage ratio would still be very healthy, 3.11, which would enable us to, at some point in the future, if say next year we decide to move forward on a large water supply project, such as the Richmond Bridge intertie, we'd have plenty of debt service coverage funds available to take out yet another bond at that time, a year from now. And we'll also at that time be completed with our 10-year financial plan. So we're looking at other projects that we might want to fund. Scenario 2 is to take out a bond in the next few months of 40 million to pay for Pine Mountain Tunnel and advanced metering infrastructure. And that rate impact on that is 2%, 2.1%. And then 3 is to add the bottlenecks in our system to allow us to take advantage of our bringing in the Sonoma County water that's available to us through our existing contracts. And that's a 3% rate increase for our customers. Again, you can see the debt service coverage ratio is still very healthy. And then scenario 4 is to add the WIFIA loan for Smith Saddle. And note that there's an asterisk there on the debt service because it's a blended rate. We're assuming a very conservative 2% on the WIFIA loan and 4% on bonds. And so that's a blended rate. All right, so moving forward to the next slide, what would be our next steps? Based on the discussion that we have today, we'd bring back to the board an authorization for bond sale for $60 million if we were to choose, say, the scenario 4. And then that would help us, we would be able to proceed with construction on Pine Mountain Tunnel and automated metering infrastructure and these bottlenecks. And then also we'll be coming back to the board regarding the WIFIA funding application for Smith Saddle. And then looking ahead, we would complete the 10-year financial plan sometime in the spring of this year prior to conducting our next cost of service analysis for the more long-term increase in capital investment.
Crystal, I just wanted to add a couple quick things if I could.
Right.
One, I wanted to note that the rate increases that she showed, and you probably already understand that would be on top of the 4% kind of baseline inflationary increase that we've identified is needed. I also wanted to note that for me, the highest priority in the district for a number of reasons is Pine Mountain Tunnel. And this is the opportunity, in my view, to get that done in AMI, given that we have, as Crystal noted, these low interest rates with indications that they're going to be going up in the coming year. And we will have spent some transactional costs in the process that we put into place for the intertie. So shifting it does recover essentially, or we utilize those transactional costs were we to go for a bond offering. So I just wanted to share that perspective with the board.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. Is this appropriate time? Yeah.
Sure.
I can see we had an earlier questions from one of our commentators about that showed confusion on this agenda item number 5, because it is possible to read into this agenda item a pullback from getting additional water. And I think we want to make it clear that that is not taking place here. We had in the list of projects that we had several that are designed for our other alternative for more water, and that's the greater expansion with our arrangement with Sonoma Water and enhancing that system and getting additional water through that vehicle. That's built into here. And on the intertie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm reading in here that because we have been legally delayed in moving forward with the legal challenge we have, it means that the certain expenditures are not immediate, but they may follow and hopefully will follow. So we're not backing off on our projects of getting new water. I think it's really important because it's easy to misread this. You can walk away from this with, nope, they pulled off any worry about additional water.
That is absolutely correct, Director Gibson. And I would add, in addition to the supply side that you talked about, AMI is taking a very strong move on the demand side to help manage the demand side of the equation. So we are moving fast in a robust way on both sides of the equation, demand side and supply side, going forward.
I think Director Gibson makes an important point here, which is I think we need to make these decisions about capital expenditures going forward in light of what our most pressing need is. And undeniably, I think we're all in agreement that addressing our water supply and increasing our water supply needs. And I understand the demand side being part of that equation too, but we need to see those things, I think, taken together. So I'm a little hesitant about making commitments right now until we have, I think, a better sense about where we need to be making sure we have sufficient financial resources to address water supply reliability. But I know these are all pressing things, and Crystal, thank you so much for your presentation. This has been a much needed conversation to look into in greater depth. One of the things that I'll just say that I'd like to see us understand a little bit better is something I'd like to understand is these are capital improvements that we've been needing to make. I know we have with each passing year we have maintenance that needs facilities age another year every year, and I'd like to understand the investments that we're making with respect to, are we keeping pace with our maintenance needs? Are we catching up on our maintenance needs? And if we're catching up, at what pace are we catching up to where we need to address our maintenance needs? I know some of our tanks, for example, are in pretty pressing condition in terms of recoating or replacement, things like that. If we don't do them now, that pressing need only becomes greater with each passing year. Where I'm going is that it would be really helpful to understand the level of investment as part of our 10-year plan, with how is our rate of investment closing the gap on our backlog of maintenance, so that we are basically each year catching up to where we ultimately would like to be, where we're pretty close to having our capital investments keeping pace with our maintenance. Does that make sense?
It does, Director Schmidt. And I would say that just for kind of clarity on the process and what we've brought to you, we were, I would say, probably 80% complete with the long-term financial plan. And we did put it on hold given the nature of the drought emergency, not just from a resource standpoint, but also, and maybe more so, that we wanted to get through the drought and understand our financial position, and maybe, like we have found, evolving priorities, and then kind of bring the final discussion to set us up for our cost of service and rate setting process going forward. Today, what we tried to do is take, from staff's view, the undeniable priorities that we believe are there, and based on feedback from the board, to see if there was interest in this window of opportunity that we have now with low rates and the transactional process we began for debt financing, if we want to proceed sooner than later on these, as we complete the financial plan and move into our long-term financial planning and rate setting to absolutely address the issues you brought up.
Couple questions. I know there may be a window of opportunity because I know there's been discussion when the Federal Reserve chairman was reappointed. He said in his testimony that he would not be adverse to raising rates. So there's definitely seemingly a window of opportunity that we may need to seize, especially because of the concerns about inflation. Another point that I think the board and the public should be aware of is that the EIR for the emergency intertie will necessarily include project alternatives, which will include an analysis of supply alternatives, which may actually help the board kind of sift through the best alternatives for the district, long-term, short-term, intermediate term. And the last thing, actually two more things. On Smith Saddle, the 20 million cost estimate for the WIFIA, after our initial presentation by our consultant, I felt pretty strongly they should be replaced. I'm very concerned about the PCBs that were found in the coating and just the ongoing cost of maintaining sort of 20th century steel tanks, very exposed steel tanks, and such a large reservoir. And I'm just wondering if the 20 million, if we can increase WIFIA, or if that's something that would need to be increased if we did do replacement. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, as far as putting AMI into the bond funding bundle, is I know there's opportunities, Director Russell has mentioned, particularly that some of the AMI companies will include financing so that we could take the cost of financing out of bond funding, and it becomes part of the ongoing cost of purchase. So those are things I think we should look into as far as AMI, maybe taking it out of our bond funding and seeing how it compares to the vendors' funding opportunities. And I know Sebastopol just approved AMI, so it might be worth taking a look at their program and seeing what they came up with. But and I do agree with Ben on the priority of Pine Mountain. That seems ready to go, and I think we need to move forward on that with all deliberate speed. So thanks.
Crystal, can you respond to the Smith Saddle question, and what does the $20 million get us in terms of that project?
Yeah, that was enough to cover replacement, the 20 million.
Good.
So that's in there. And it does, WIFIA loans do have to be replacement. So building the new tanks for Pine Mountain tunnel replacement were not, they didn't qualify for WIFIA funding.
Okay, but Smith Saddle was proposed for the grant or bond funding as a replacement?
That's correct.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I appreciate it.
Even though we are, for clarity, going to be bringing back the next assessment per Director Russell's request and lay that out and make that decision.
Okay.
That was my very next question, Ben.
And we actually had a landslide on the access road to Smith Saddle during the rain events, and we're currently coordinating with the county open space because it runs through their lands. We have easement on a cost share to get the road back in shape so we can even access the tanks for all of the work that's coming up.
Is it downhill or is it uphill?
That's a good question. I haven't personally been there. Paul?
I'll check it out.
It should be uphill. Tanks are typically,
Yeah, there's,
Wow.
it's very precarious when you start circling around the top.
Yeah.
That section of the road there is a very steep embankment, and it's pretty, it's a very steep and deep embankment above those tanks.
Okay. It was a very interesting presentation, Crystal. A lot to think about and prioritize in our approach. So any other questions from the board? Hearing none. Public comment?
Yes, there are two, John Lashinsky and Roger Roberts. Mr. Lashinsky?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and
Okay,
clear.
great. Yeah, Monty Schmidt, I'm sorry to make another comment, but I can't resist. You brought up maintenance. And I can tell you, and going forward, maybe I should discuss this in February 1st, but whatever's done by the water district in terms of new sources and new equipment and stuff like that, maintenance is a huge issue, particularly in newer technology. Personal experience with the flood zone board 4 here in Tiburon. We had a major flood back in 14, I think. And the whole thing was basically a proximate cause was bad maintenance, bad training on the old equipment. And which shouldn't have happened because it's been there for decades. And when we put in a brand new pump station, I'm still waiting for them to get some qualified people to keep that maintained properly. It's far more advanced than what we've had before. It's a huge issue when you go forward on these projects. And if you're bringing in, new systems and new technology, obviously I'm talking about desalination. But beyond that, it's a super issue. And I'm glad you're bringing it up in the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts?
You can hear me, I trust.
Loud and
Yes.
clear.
Monty, thank you for your comments, and also Larry Bragman, you're spot on. But I'm interested in the inflation issue. It's my understanding that the inflation rate currently this year is somewhere between 6 and 8%. And if that continues, if you postpone your projects for more than 3 or 4 or 5 years, you're going to have double the costs. And so part of the reason for going forward now is to reduce the cost of replacement later. And so I would urge you to take that into consideration and do as much as you possibly can before you get nailed by inflation. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
Okay, with that, thank you all. Let's adjourn.
Director
Go ahead.
Russell, I
Yes.
just wanted to understand where the board is specifically on this item. So just very briefly.
Which item, Ben?
The
one we're talking about? Okay.
Yes, sir. We presented the 4 scenarios, and what staff is interested to know is, should we come back with a bond issuance to move forward? Would you like more information? I would suggest, again, Pine Mountain Tunnel needs to happen. I thought the AMI comment Director Bragman had was a good one, and we do need to understand that, and we'll do that. That project, and then thinking about, do we want to get AMI done in context of a follow-up of the drought? If we can do it this other way and financially it makes sense, I would assume a vendor essentially fronting the money, the cost would be certainly higher than we could get ourselves. I mean, typically you see that right in the private side, but it's a path we do need to understand. So, and then we do have the Smith Saddle, and of course the transmission pinch points that we're going to be understanding in more detail. So I am I want, if I could, a bit more sense of, is the board up for us to come back? Do we have a sense of what projects we want to move forward? Come back one more time to a board meeting or committee to discuss it a bit further and answer some of the questions that have been raised? What the sense is of the board?
I think it's premature to plop this on us and expect an answer, Ben.
Yeah.
So I think that, and also I think this is important enough to be brought to a board meeting. But I think we might need to dance one more time before we do that, and maybe in the finance meeting. At least from my thinking, I need some time to digest what's been proposed. I think we do have a unique opportunity to move forward and get some of these things behind us. Clearly, you're correct. The financing part is going to be more expensive through a vendor. However, if you look at the way airplanes are purchased, you know, the difference between Airbus and Boeing is not the quality of the airplane. It's the quality of the financing. And that's what makes the difference, which airplane they buy, is who gives them the better deal on the financing. So there are options there. And I'm inclined to get that AMI done. And I don't know, Jack, Larry, Monty, you got thoughts you want to pitch out now, or you want to wait for the next round?
You know, I know I'm going to get hammered from some of my folks about the RF issue. So, I mean, I'm just putting that on the table now. I mean, I understand, you know, if we use cell pulses, it's a whole different ballgame from a mesh network. But I know that's an issue up in Sebastopol, and but you know, we've talked about it. You know, I'm certainly open to it. It just seems like it's the next step. I'm just saying that's going to be an issue. I think it might be worth having our bond consultant come in and lay out some scenarios as far as the cost. And then the other thing would be whether those bond costs would be bundled in our CMF fee or not, which I kind of favor just for the purpose of consistency, which they say is the hobgoblin of small minds. But, you know, sometimes at least as far as explaining what we're doing to the public, that can help. So there's a couple.
That's a very, very interesting comment, Larry, about the CMF. I think we should follow up on that one for sure, Ben, in the finance meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe Chuck can run some numbers, and you know, I would just, you know, but I definitely think, you know, we do have a window of opportunity, and we should not sort of let it drop. So I think we should move forward. I think we're a little ways away from making a decision, but I do think you guys should continue with the path. So we're ready to roll.
So I want us to try to help move the things, separate maybe the things that we do have some larger agreement or maybe enough agreement to bring to the board for moving forward. I think the WIFIA funding, you know, is, you know, that financing seems like, I don't want to say it's a no-brainer. Clearly it's an important project, and that if we can really finance it at such an incredibly low rate, that just seems like a smart move to go forward. The same thing with AMI. I mean, this is something that we got hammered and we addressed over and over during our discussions around drought and supply and water use, that we really need to have a far better understanding. I think this is clearly and I think it's a no regrets in terms of something we need to do. Is this the time to launch that? You know, as long as it's not a trade-off or something that impedes other ways that we can secure water supplies, I would say let's move forward with that. The other projects, the other financing, I think is less clear to me. But I'd love to see if we can not. If I want the staff to be able to move forward with things. If we are there on certain things, let's do it and let's get moving.
Yeah, and just I agree on WIFIA. I mean, I think it is a no-brainer, and that is an opportunity that needs to be seized.
Yeah.
And Ben, what is the time frame on bonding? where are we? What's the next activity with the people we've already retained? Where are they? They're going to come back to us in a month, in 2 months,
Yeah.
3 months?
So essentially, it's a holding pattern, given the focus was on the intertie. But we have indicated, even though because of the environmental process, we won't be proceeding with bonding that, we've asked them to stand by as we engage the board in these sorts of discussions. So I'm not sure how long that standby holds in terms of transactional costs. I think we probably have I don't know, a couple of months before the first interest rate hike. I've heard there's plans for maybe 3 this coming year, but they'd be small, but collectively it starts to add up. So
they don't necessarily pass through though, Ben. It's not that simple.
Right. That's a good point as well. So I believe we have enough information at this point, and I think it is a good suggestion to bring it back one more time, benefiting from the clarity we just received. So thank you for that.
Also, we're missing a board member, so I think it's important that she be included in that discussion.
Right.
Why don't you, if you don't mind, talk to Jim and find out if we said go today, what is the fuse? How long is the fuse? Let's just get a time so we know what we're talking about, and maybe you could ask him the same question that about the interest rates. What's likely to happen in the municipal bond market versus what's happening in the LIBOR or whatever its equivalent is, that they're the treasury bond numbers that they're talking about.
We'll do that.
Oh, okay. I think, Monty, I appreciate your thoughts, and I'm normally in a hurry. Today, I'm less inclined to push things into a decision, but open to discussion. No response.
Is the question whether we ask staff to bring to the board at one of our next meetings the first two, the Pine Mountain Tunnel with WIFIA funding and the AMI, and then
Smith Saddle.
Or I'm sorry, Smith Saddle, or are we hunting on bringing anything forward and waiting till the finance committee? Is that
we can't move forward on Smith Saddle until we hear back from the consultants about the responses that are due from the previous one. So that one's kind of a separate issue. I think that my thinking is that the bigger picture is we really need a presentation in the finance end about these impacts. I mean, it's fine to hear what Crystal says about the impacts. I don't know where those numbers came from, the impacts on rates. I presume they're generated by Chuck. I don't know. So
yes.
But I'd still just as soon hear from the horse's mouth, being it's really a finance issue.
Yeah, I think bringing this back to finance, benefiting from the feedback from the board, does work well from a timing and process standpoint.
Okay.
And so maybe we can, that's sooner than our next operations meeting. So that.
Exactly. And I think it's more appropriate for the finance than it is for operations.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're all cool with that. We'll hold off till finance and have another shot, and then we still need a presentation at the board level. It isn't sufficient to do these in committee. This got to be done in front of the full board.
Okay.
I think. Yeah, no, I agreed.
So Ben, it's in your court. Let's get that answer about if we said go today, how long we're talking about from the bond council and those guys, and then let's get something on the next finance to develop this a little fuller. And then and I do appreciate your thoughts, Monty. I'm all with you. Let's get going. And Larry, let's get it going and keep the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Okay.
All righty.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Good meeting. Thanks a lot.
All right.
We're going to adjourn. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.